Gary, I'm stoked about this partnership that we just lined up with Fuji Sports.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. We are going to have a monthly giveaway, and all you need to do to enter that is go to therolradio.com/belt and take a survey. And that survey is, do you wash your belt? The age-old question in jiu-jitsu. Do you wash your belt? All the rules are there. So super simple, super quick, and they are going to be giving away some amazing, amazing stuff.
Why wouldn't you want free gear? I mean, think about it for a second. One, you're helping us solve this mega question in jiu-jitsu. Do you do or you do not wash your belt? Two, you can see the results on our website as this entire thing is unfolding. And three, you're entering into the drawing, into the giveaway of free gear from Fuji. So just
check it out. Yep. therolradio.com/belt. Cast your vote, and let's get to the show. On this episode of ROL Radio, we have an artist, martial artist, Marine veteran, and one of the first non-Brazilian BJJ black belts, a group known as the BJJ Dirty Dozen, Chris Haueter. Listen as Chris tells his story of training in California garages with the legends of BJJ, competing in Gracie Challenge matches, and what it's like rolling with the man most considered the greatest of all time, Rickson Gracie. Chris also discusses his philosophy of BJJ, think street, train sport, practice art, and how all three are needed to become a true master of BJJ, and how he believes BJJ is evolving. Here is ROL Radio with a true original and the man who coined the term combat base, Chris Haueter.
Welcome to ROL Radio.
And we are live. Gary, how are you?
I'm really good today. I'm excited as usual, but I'm super excited today because I think we have the guest that's been practicing training jiu-jitsu longer than any other guest we've had. So I'm really interested in what he has to say today.
And typically I will be the one introducing the guest, but I want you to do it. I want you to take the honors today. I think you've been really stoked about this conversation. So why don't you take this on right now?
I have, and today we have Chris Haueter on, and I have been super excited. There he is, throwing bones. And the reason I've been so excited is just because, one, I'm old, and it's interesting to me to hear somebody else who has that perspective. And then he's also, like I said, been around longer than any guest we've had from the beginning here in the U.S. One of the Dirty Dozen, first 12 black belts. So go ahead, Thomas. Let's get started.
So one of the interesting things, Chris, first of all, welcome to the show. Thanks for taking your time out of your busy schedule and joining us for this conversation.
I thank you guys.
One of the interesting things, I think, often beginning of jiu-jitsu is being referred to as the UFC 1. That's when kind of went into public, right? Everybody saw what Gracie and family was able to do. However, you started jiu-jitsu 5 years prior to that.
Yes.
How did it all started?
Well, all right. Of course, anything in history. First of all, guys, I appreciate you having me on, and anyone who's willing to hear me speak again, I'm glad you're willing to hear me. I've been on other podcasts, and there's what I have is my quote-unquote origin story, which I've said a couple of times. I have what I call my short, condensed, one-paragraph version. Then I have my paragraph essay version, then I have my novel version, right? And depending on the mood that I'm in or the mood it feels like my audience is in is the extent in which I will explain my origin story, because all I really have is my story and my perspective on it. And before I even start on any answering things, please feel free to interrupt me at any time and redirect me if you feel like I'm off track, because I will jump off track. I will sometimes intentionally leap off track, and sometimes I have no intent to get back on the track.
All right.
Fair enough.
Origin story.
Gary, we've been warned.
All right. So I'm going to try to weave this in with my views and opinions on not only the entire big picture history of martial arts and human hand-to-hand combat sports, along with the cultural histories as it relates to America and Europe, I'm going to add in there, and Brazil, and how I feel like everything kind of made some weird smooth blending, some conflicts and some twists, like which happens anytime cultures or subcultures interact in me. Mm-hmm. There was a while a few years back where Americans or Europeans would be offended by what was the Gracie challenge and what was perceived, perhaps correctly, as the arrogance of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. And in the early days, with that challenge, before UFC, there was a chatter about it amongst the martial arts world, to include the combat sports, wrestling, judo, the karate guys, the hard styles, the soft styles, the Jeet Kune Do crowd, and that Gracie challenge is really what was the spearhead of the jiu-jitsu into America and Europe.
So define what Gracie challenge means. Some people might not even realize what that is and what it really meant.
What it basically was a member of the Gracie team, and that was back when they were all one team, to include the Helio side, the Carlos side, the Carlson side, the Machados, Fabio Santos. All these guys were basically the Gracie clan. And there was basically a challenge out there. Well, there was that we will hash out whatever rules we will have, and we will have a fight between any style, and we will win. And often there was money involved. There was the challenge to Mike Tyson. There was challenges to some of the Olympic wrestlers, all the karate guys, kung fu guys, all the guys who said we teach the best style, our style's so deadly. And that was kind of the spearhead that drove jiu-jitsu into the martial arts, the backroom chatter. And this is, of course, all a pre-internet. So I first heard about Gracie, jiu-jitsu and the challenge, I want to say it was a year maybe before I was introduced. And I heard it, I was a Jeet Kune Do guy. I had one pro Muay Thai fight. Come here, Pete. Come here.
Say,
what are you doing? Why are you barking? And I won my fight, but it hurt really bad. And again, here we're moving into my origin now. And here's the Chris Haueter origin story. So I was an insecure kid. When I graduated high school, I weighed 119 pounds. I was late to mature, a lightweight with a large ego, a big mouth, a stuttering problem, and I got in a lot of fights growing up. And I had that classical sense of male honor that when you're insulted, it quickly becomes talk, 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 that ends here. And it also, that's kind of the origin of my whole philosophy, really, and my interest in philosophy, psychology, sociology, in how humans interact with a conflict and resolution. And because I was a stutterer, I spent a lot of time not being able to speak and only observe argument. And I became a keen observer of how humans, particularly human males, interact when they're engaged in some type of conflict, and how quickly, including myself, we cross emotions with intellect. We cross emotions with reason, including myself, and how things offend us. And whether that comes from our root primal needs as males, that I used to use this term all the time. I don't know if it's politically correct anymore, but I'm going to use it now. Is I concluded years ago as a child, watching animal shows with my dad and all that, that basically the human, particularly the human male, has three primary root needs, which I called the 3 F's: feeding, fighting, fucking. And most of our conflict at the primal level involves those. And then we have our intellect, our egos, our thoughts, our narrative, our stories, and we create a worldview in which, if insulted, we feel like we need to defend our honor. Hence the culture of the duel. Mm-hmm. And the martial sports are the sport form of the culture of dueling. And whether we want to call that the human-made rules of judo, Greco, wrestling, judo, taekwondo, hands-only boxing, but boxing allowing more time in the clinch or less time in the clinch. All these things are the rules that we construct so we can have duels without massive injury or trauma. And the Gracie Challenge was an explosion into the already established norms and the waning of the duel. There was either brawls in the street or more refined combat sports such as wrestling, boxing. Muay Thai, I remember in the early days, and I will arrogantly say I was also an early adopter of that in the United States. Whereas everyone was doing kung fu, but taekwondo, high kicks, I was lucky enough, right place, right time, which is a good thing when you're in LA, that I found Muay Thai very early and quickly realized how much more efficient of an art it was to strike your opponent utilizing your elbows, hands, knees, and feet far more than were the other arts I had practiced. So I quickly saw how you have to test the art. You can't just have we practice a style that is so dangerous we can't ever train it. That if you can't train the style against other guys trying to kick your ass, then you have no laboratory to actually approve it. It's an unverified acclaim that so many of these other arts had. And I am a scientist. And that's what I spent most of my college doing, and also art. And so I like to blend those two. Often pisses off the scientist and sometimes pisses off the artist too. But the combat sports within their man-made rules, create a laboratory that whiffs out the bullshit and finds what works and finds what I'm going to loosely call the truth. So the Gracie challenge, in essence, was a debate over the truth of hand-to-hand combat.
So do you think?
I
just wanted to ask real quick. Go ahead, finish, but one question.
One part. So part of the problem happened was the combat sports, because of the man-made rules, i.e. the clinch is broken apart in boxing. It's held a little longer in Muay Thai, but ultimately even that. In Muay Thai, once you throw an opponent, trip with the opponent, there's a break and it restarts. Wrestling, judo has no strikes, yet they have the grappling part. But jiu-jitsu is saying we can kick your ass in any of those if we remove these man-made rules. If we limit them to only no eye gouging, no groin grabs, no skin rips or pulls, and when you say you want to stop, we will stop. Those are pretty much the original rules, and that's it. You can hit with any part of your body on any part of your opponent's body. You can grab, squeeze, hold, or attack any part of their body other than but the groin and the eyes. And those were the rules. And it's kind of hard to place yourself in history, but at that time, those rules were intense. Those rules are a street fight. Those rules are an unlicensed street brawl in someone's yard, a bar, or an alley that says we are going to see which martial art is the best art.
So painting the timeline, you encounter or you hear about these challenges. So they are already taking place in 87, yes. Right?
Yes.
What is your first thoughts when you hear this and when you see them for the first time? Like, because I mean, I'm coming in a couple decades later. Like this is, I'm way behind the curveball, but I'm curious, what is your perspective? You hear about this, you go see it, and it's like, what is going on?
I can tell you right off the bat, as a martial artist, again, who grew up having a hard time turning down a fight, it kept me up at night. It was like, wow, this is no longer junior high school, but karate club. This is now adult martial arts, and it's real. And there was a fear, and it was intense. It was, and culturally, as someone who I view all of us as yin and yang, and we must have a balance. It's like, if you're all liberal, you're fucked up. If you're all conservative, you're fucked up. If you're all aggressive, you're fucked up. If you're all passive, you're fucked up. And that yin and yang as a model metaphor of balance, my civilization half of that, my yin, I'm going to call it, saw, wow, this is a very gnarly threat to civilization in a way, almost. I even saw it as. But at the same time, I also have this aspect of me that, it's like even back then, especially in the 80s, there was a lot of cultural repression of the combat sports. It's like people think that now there's like, oh, men aren't men anymore and all that. No, that was happening in the 80s too. And and there was a talk about how brutal boxing was, and there was but talk about how there's no way we'll ever allow Muay Thai, people hitting each other with their elbows and knees. And wrestling had seen itself now kind of as just a pure sport, but judo was just a pure sport. The actual combat hand-to-hand aspects were rapidly leaving the cultural view of what those combat sports even were. It's like, here's an example. My grandpa was a miner and a boxer, and he was one of Joe Lewis's sparring partners, back in when was it, the 30s or whenever it was, I don't remember. And he would say that he would watch it a lot, and he would always complain about how, they break the clinch up now way too early. I remember him complaining about that there's a whole art of boxing that is just about the clinch. Mm-hmm. And as a natural grappler, even when I boxed, I preferred to close that gap and fight in and out of the clinch, because it was sneakier and I had a feel of my opponent. I'm a natural grappler. I embrace that aspect of me. And I used to say all the time in the early days is that most grapplers, even if we do Muay Thai and boxing, most, not all, but most, go through a phase where we feel more comfortable losing in the grappling part than we even do winning in the non-clinch stand-up part. In other words, as grapplers, our comfort zone begins at the clinch. Mm-hmm. As a striker, their comfort zone is gone at the clinch. Mm-hmm. And of course, again, we are all yin and yang. We want to merge those two. And in the early boxing days, it's like back before World War II, before nice spongy mats, before soft, good closed cell foam gloves, but boxing was a far more brutal sport, far more brutal, when the gloves were cotton with not a lot of thumb. And even before that, your hands were only wrapped just to stop the cuts and then padded slightly. And ancient boxing, I'm going to call it now, one could call it classical boxing, but a lot of times the reason why you kept your hands this way was because after 15 rounds of being hit in the fingers, you would hurt your hands or even hit here. So you would turn your hands here because the fist hitting your hand hurts like shit. So equipment, the environment changes how we interact all the time, which is why one of my speeches I give all the time is environment is stronger than will. And the best your will can do is will you to alter your environment. But environment always trumps will. So environments had rapidly shifted in a more, let's not let our athletes get hurt. And in the 80s, that was also happening in the NFL and in college ball, adding the cage on the helmet and the helmets, padding and all this stuff, right? So then came the Gracie challenge, UFC, which blew that all apart. And I mean, I could obviously go into early UFC history and how it altered. And I can say this. In the early days in MMA, UFC is a brand name of mixed martial arts competition. And in the early days, most of the guys who were involved in it came from one of the, what I call the 5 main reality styles: wrestling with Jiu Jitsu, boxing, Muay Thai with Judo. That's where most of them who came into MMA were masters of one of those arts prior to entering with the MMA world. And out of those arts, out of those 5 main combat sports, you get used to the idea of real competition, that my opponent is going to try everything he can but to win, and I'm going to try everything I can but to win. And the other arts, the karates, the kung fus, and all that stuff, they lacked that. All right, now I'm going to shut up because I will go on and interrupt me, guys.
Listen, I'm sponge to everything you're saying. This is so interesting. But Gary had a question, so
to go back, did you think the Gracie challenge? You touched on it a little bit, but did you think it was bullshit, or were you like, I'm in on this? What these guys have.
Honestly, I did not. And I remember one of the first guys I'd asked about it was Bert Richardson, who's a prominent guy. He's also a Jiu Jitsu black belt now. He's in Hawaii. I remember asking him very early on. And he said, what these guys are like really good judo guys who like to fight. And as a martial artist who'd experienced a little judo, I knew right away that that's a powerful tool. Whereas in the Jeet Kune Do world, they kind of looked at judo as, oh, that's just a soft sport. Whereas as a high school wrestler who'd done Muay Thai and fought a lot, I knew the efficacy of the grappling arts. So even though a lot of the Jeet Kune Do guys, the boxers and all that, said, oh, it's just with judo, they keep their hands down. We'd punch them in the face on entry. It isn't a problem. All that. I knew, no, I've done a lot of fighting and it's pretty hard, but stop a clinch. I used to say this all the time. In the early days, and I said this when I was a new purple belt before UFC 1, and I had a few good challenges and that as well, that we were like an AR-15 and the other styles were a musket. And they could still kill you. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But they basically had a shot. And if they blew it, you'd close that gap. And once the clinch engaged, it was over.
And I think that's very... And I think that's very visible in the early videos that you can find all over now. But it's essentially, that was the plan, right? Close the clinch or close the gap, close the distance, control the distance, right? And then from there, the fight was unfolding in a controlled environment, if you will, right? At the time of the grappler, whoever the grappler was. You mentioned that you had couple of the challenges of yourself. Yeah. I'm curious, and this is kind of a logistical question, but I can't stop myself from asking, how are those organized? I mean,
very loosely.
Somebody stops by and you're like, oh yeah, let's go, and we just drop it, or this is organized event when we say, well, all right, we're gonna do this.
So I'll just say one thing before I even leap into that is there's this weird psychological phenomenon that happens when guys are engaged in what I'm going to call unlicensed martial arts boxing or a challenge brawl. or even like a schoolyard brawl in high school, right? And it's that thing where it's like, as a grappler, especially in the olden days, when you were in one of these brawls, a challenge brawl or a fight, when you were in that clinch, you could feel your opponent striking you, but as they're ending up on the ground, sometimes with some of them, you would feel the punch get weaker, not because they were running out of strength, not because they were running out of leverage, but because they could feel, okay, I'm going to lose and I don't want to piss this guy off now. And then there were other ones where you could feel their sneakiness. Like they would try to hit you and then stop and kind of pause, the way a dog rolls over and holds up its leg. And then the minute you start but to show mercy, they bite you or attack you, or they will grab at your groin, or they reach at your eyes or your mouth. So back in those early days, and I remember being told once in a group by Rickson, and then I will go in my one-on-one story, that you can't let, I remember this, when you beat these guys, they will not believe it. Because sometimes Jiu Jitsu makes it so easy. So when you beat these guys, you have to show them that you beat them and they had no answer to your Jiu Jitsu.
Is that why often they use open hand striking to create the kind of a domination mode versus?
That's part of it.
Okay.
That's only part of it. The other aspect is when you hit the crown of a head, you can hurt your hand. When you're striking in a mount but the guy holds up his elbows, hitting the point of the elbow hurts the shit out of your hand. And you might, as Haleo would say all the time, I'm training for a 2-hour fight. And yes, I could break my hand and go for 8 more minutes. But after an hour, that hand will swell, and now I've lost the weapon. So in the early days, the philosophy was not like it is in MMA now. It's altered. So here's a story, right? So this is when I'm a blue belt and I'm in Hegan's garage. Hegan Machado, who was then called Rickson Gracie, and I had just completed helping him with a one-on-one private. And there was a couple guys. They looked like they were from a gang, I remember, and they were watching the last part of the private, and then I left. And as soon as I got home, Hegan calls me up, and this is back before anyone had cell phones or any of that stuff. Hello, hi, hey, Chris, this Hegan. Oh, Hegan, how's it going? Yeah. Remember you just left, and there's these guys, and they're watching. This guy, he says he beat you no problem. He don't want to fight me because he says, I'm too big, I'm black belt, but these little white guy, blue belt, I beat this guy no problem. I need you to come up here now. Oh, and I got to add this. All right. So in the early days, and I remember Horion, he would kind of ask like who you were, your background and all that. And at one point he would ask you, and I don't remember his exact words, he would say, so you are willing to accept a challenge, right? And of course I said, oh yeah. And then later that night, I realized what I had done, right? I'm like, oh shit, oh fuck. And of course I'm not going to back out, right? I can't, but that's good because it made you train very seriously. right? It's like, this is serious shit. I'm training not because it's a hobby. And in the way Horian asked, I don't remember exactly again, but it's like, many guys, they do with jiu-jitsu for exercise, for make them feel good, make them feel fit and healthy. But then there are warriors, right? And I remember his whole thing when he asked me, so are you a warrior who takes challenges? I'm like, oh yeah, I am, right? And so, okay, anyways, Keegan calls me up and it's raining out there. If you guys hear the rain. So I'm nervous as shit. I'm like, oh fuck, I'm gonna get in a fight. This is my first challenge fight. Jesus Christ, I'm a blue belt. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. I mean, I did, but in short, I'm gonna just zip to. So right off the bat, and I had Muay Thai experience, so I wasn't that scared of the clinch part. I entered with a lunging kick, grip, grab, threw him on the ground, turned him over, but choked him, and he stopped. And then he wanted to go again.
Of course.
So I'm ready
because
to
there was
go
a fluke.
again.
Yeah, you got lucky.
It's a fluke. And then he goes, stop. And he calls me over and he goes, you're too nice. So
okay.
We go again. And I kind of did the same thing. I had mounted him. I had slapped him once. He turned, and I think I don't remember whether I choked him or armbarred him. And he called me over again, and he said, no more locks, no more submissions. He thinks it's a fluke. You need to hurt him. You need to convince him it isn't a fluke. And I remember the same thing all happened again, and I was either like half on his back or half in the mount, and I glanced over at Hegan, and he did this. And so I started hitting him in the face and made him quit with strikes. And then after I was explained how when it's a jiu-jitsu guy who's going to be part of us, who's joining us, not trying to learn jiu-jitsu to fight us and beat it, we approach it in another way. And you don't give them the art. You control them and you make them lay bed at night. I remember him. He's like, you want him to lay at night and go, oh, my elbow is sore for 3 weeks. So he knows it wasn't a fluke. You want him to feel the lumps in his face, the swelling in his mouth. He can't open his eyes so much. Like I remember a lot of these early speeches, and which is now MMA, right? Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of how it was in the early days.
What was your feeling when you were on top of a guy and you punching him? Was it your first fight, like legit first fight, or?
That was my first official jiu-jitsu fight where it was, in essence, call it a Gracie sanctioned fight, right? But I mean, and again, I don't say this with any kind of pride, but I fought a lot growing up. Like I was one of the kids known who I get in fights.
So I find this very interesting.
I was a high school wrestler, so I had already experienced closing the gap, holding a guy in a headlock and punching him in the face. That was not a new experience.
So let me ask you this. So it seems this is very interesting. So you experience with fighting, yeah, and then you are in this moment of during this challenge, and yet you choose not to strike. You want to execute this with submission.
Yes.
What's the thought here? You trying to be gentle, not to hurt the person, or
my thought is
you are the fighter. You it's not the first time yet.
But like in some ways, as much as my coaches viewed me as a warrior, I'm much more of a ambassador. Mm-hmm. I'm not. I'm more of a diplomatic kind of guy. And part of what I loved about but jiu-jitsu is its diplomacy.
Yeah.
It's non-violent. It's the least violent of the ways in which you can wreck your opponent. Even judo, you are hitting your opponent with the earth, right?
Yeah, essentially.
Yeah.
And wrestling is explosive and athletic, and because it lacked submission, what you would do is pin your opponent in your high school brawl in the alley and then punch them or grind them down until you could hit them more. But jiu-jitsu really was this magic. It's like, wow, I can put my opponent in a spot, especially a joint lock or even a choke, where I can talk to them and resolve our conflict now through words because I'm controlling my opponent. Mm-hmm. I can now say, like years ago, I was a cop, and it's the perfect arrest and control tool because you have them in physical compliance, which then you can rapidly get them into mental compliance. You control the body, then you give them, you let them realize, I'm giving you mercy. I am mounted on you. I have turned you over. I am on your neck. I could kill you, and I am giving you mercy. And that, as a psychological effect, is huge. Now, of course, years later and all that, and in the combat sports, the art of pressure is one of my favorite things because pressure does that before you've even gotten your opponent into a lock or a choke. That feeling of being absolutely controlled.
Powerless.
Yeah, you're powerless, you can't breathe.
Right? Yes, and that is the art of jiu-jitsu. So I often say when I'm asked, and I've been saying this for years, is when they ask me, what is jiu-jitsu? I say, well, let's talk about street, art, and sport first. And then I will talk about that. And then I will say, the art of jiu-jitsu is the art to control and submit my opponent, utilizing the least amount of athletics and the maximum amount of knowledge, cunningness, and guile. What is the sport, you ask? I knew you would. The sport is, how do I deploy my art within the man-made rules of the game, utilizing all of my art and the maximum amount of my athletics as well. That's the sport. And what is the street, you ask? The elimination of the man-made rules of the game, a fight in spirit to the death, where I will use everything I have in the absence of all rules. And that's where I split them apart. And if I use the analogy of an artist, I'm an artist. If street is the red corner of the triangle, street's red, let's put it at the top, like blood, fear, red. The sport is blue. There's rules, there's order, there's a game. And the art is either black or white. That's yin and yang. And if you blend all those, you blend the black, the white, the blue, the red, you just get a weird shade of purple. And that's the way too many instructors instruct this. Because you will miss the red in the purple, and you will miss the blue in the purple, and you'll miss the black and white in the purple. You have to pull those apart and see, sometimes in the middle of a single roll, you are analyzing, here's the street part, here's the sport part, and this is the art. And the art is exploration. But the art enables you to grow, but to risk, but to try new stuff that you wouldn't try in the street or in a major competition match. The art is growth. It's research, development. It's the blend of art and science. The street is that hypothetical, real primal need why we all walked in the door, why we all ultimately want this is I want to know if I will win, lose, or die in a real fight. And what scares us humans is the unknown. So the non-reality martial artist has no idea how they will really stand in a fight. No clue. They can only go into imaginations, scenarios, and then through fear to control it. Well, if he came at me like this, I'd punch him in the nose, or I'd raise my arms like this, or I'd do dragon style or this style, and all these things which just create more layers of illusion and conspiracy of what a real fight is. So unless you go in and you try it, then you realize it's not quite as scary as you really thought.
Here's an interesting thought. So do you think that they can coexist or exist without another? So can sport exist without art? Can art exist without street? Can street exist without sport? And the main reason why I'm asking this, there's plenty of instructors out there, and you mentioned part of it already. There's plenty of instructors out there who will focus on sport only, which, I mean, it's great. It is what it is, right? There are some that will focus on street only, period. And the interesting point comes in when those two start talking to each other, because one will say, well, I'm going to go inverted. I'm going to do this and this and this and this and this and this, and I'm going to score points. And the other person is going to say, well, no, you won't, because I'm going to punch you in the face. And that's the $1 million argument in jiu-jitsu community in general. Which one is which one, and which one is better than the other? What are your thoughts on this? Can they exist without the other one?
I mean, maybe they can exist without the other one. I don't know where that evolution will lead to. And I think we can see through just historical observation of the last but 20 years that the historical evolution of sport, but jiu-jitsu only, has definitely split apart from the street-oriented. And then one can even say MMA has now moved on its own branch. And as a guy who I consider myself to be an amateur scientist with a college background, if you look at the analogy of evolution, and evolution is a fact, even if you don't have to believe it out there, but it is a fact. It's kind of like the large cats, a lion, a tiger, a cheetah, a panther. These are the branches that have evolved off of a common ancestral lineage. And the lion can still breed with the tiger and create a liger, but that offspring is sterile. The way mules, a horse and a donkey, a polar bear can still breed with a grizzly bear because they are not that far apart yet in evolution. And right now, sport, but jiu-jitsu, and let's call it street jiu-jitsu, are starting to become a lion and a tiger. They still interbreed, but it's starting to come apart. But just like environment is stronger than will, as our climate is changing, the grizzly bear is now breeding with polar bears. It's starting to happen. So new things will always evolve. So I think oftentimes it's a mistake to ethically, culturally judge evolution. Again, I'm an observer, not a manipulator thereof. Within my own students, sure, I want them to train in a balanced way, but I have no opinion on whether one school does pure sport. I think that's great because they will find inverted weird moves that you would never find if you were worried about being punched.
Absolutely.
They will come up with new stuff, just like one style of a cat, a cheetah, will come up with new ways of hunting that would never work for a lion or a panther. So I kind of view it as like that. And go ahead, ask me one more, and then we'll roll this up because I actually have.
Listen, I have so I'm going to change gears a little bit. So obviously you are one of the Dirty Dozen, and for those who don't know, that's the 12 original black belts here in US. I want you to talk about that a little bit from a historical perspective. You know, what impact did that have on you, and really, did it have any impact? I mean, what's your view on this, being one of those very first, on the very beginning, way back in the day, knowing what jiu-jitsu is today and how it's impacting community in the world all around the globe?
Well, the first thing I would say is I'm not quite arrogant enough to believe that it was all me, the reason why I became one of the first black belts. Again, environment is stronger than will. I happened to be in the right place at the right time where my mind was open enough and I was curious and interested in enough, but to where I got to go shake Horion's hand and start in his garage when Rickson, Hoist, and Hegan all but taught in his garage. It was pure luck. That's the luck part. Then there's the will part. I was persistent and obsessed. I couldn't get enough of jiu-jitsu. I was not a hobbyist. And so time went down its normal path, which is always forward, for us at least. And I found myself being one of the first non-Brazilian black belts. And in that experience, I remember at the time, one of my good pals, but Chance Wanless, who's one of my black belts over in Asia, he said, "Dude, do you realize how huge this fucking is?" And I remember I did not at the time. I did not realize it was that big of a deal. And at that time, my view of the jiu-jitsu black belt had only been Machado's, but Gracie's. These guys who still toyed with me and played with me. Now maybe I could make it more interesting, but I still, right? It was like, so I didn't feel like a black belt until about 4 months later when I had my first black belt match against a Brazilian black belt, my weight, and I won. And then I felt like a black belt. And it was also then I realized that what my coaches, I believe at the time, Carlos Machado had said a couple things right after I got my black belt. He said, "Do not become a lazy black belt. But jiu-jitsu, the art is so good that you will neglect your athletics. So don't neglect your athletics just because the art is so good." And he told me, and there are levels of black belt. And this is where jiu-jitsu starts. This is not where it ends. This is where it starts.
Pure wisdom. I know you're short on time and that you got to get out of here. At the end of every episode, we quickly have 5 questions for you. If you don't mind, and those are quick. So, if you don't mind just snapping the first thing that comes to your mind,
Okay.
You know, some of them are funny, some of them are not, but it kind of generates the interesting end to the conversation. Gary will take the lead on this.
Yeah,
Okay.
for sure. All right, let's go. What was it like the first time you stepped on the mat? And I guess we'll go strictly jiu-jitsu.
I was nervous. I was scared. I stared across the garage and saw Rickson Gracie, and he said, and I said, I'm here for my first lesson. And he said, you're not here to challenge, are you? And I remember my knees actually shook. And I said, no, I'm here to learn. So, okay.
Nice.
That's a good one.
What was your most rewarding achievement?
With jiu-jitsu?
It doesn't matter.
Yeah,
Whatever comes to your mind.
It's kind of a personal thing, but I would say it was when I had a huge a paradigm shift. And you know, I don't want to jump into that, but I've used up 8 of my 9 lives, and in other areas of existence. And there's a couple events in which made me realize that this is all you got, one life. And the sand is leaving the hourglass every moment of every day, and make the best use of what sand you've got left.
Wisdom. Good, nice. All right. Have you ever wanted to quit?
Yes, but I've always known that I can't. And I use often when people ask me whether I've been injured or like whatever it is, or I'm frustrated or my ego's mad because a guy who I normally beat me in a competition match or something like that from some fucking footlock or like whatever it is. I do with jiu-jitsu because I can't not do with jiu-jitsu. So I'm stuck with it. I have to adapt.
All right. You touched on this a little bit just a couple minutes ago, but describe your feelings when you received your black belt.
Like every belt, with the exception of my brown belt, I felt like I wasn't ready yet. The only belt I got where I felt like not, oh, thank you, I don't really deserve this, was my brown belt. I'd been a purple belt for like 5.5 years. And it was like, fuck you very much. Yes, I'm a brown belt. But my every other belt felt like, I don't know if I'm there yet. And I grew into it quickly because jiu-jitsu is adaptation. Next question.
All right. Last one is, do you wash your belt?
My original belt? No, I do not. And if you have a real Japanese cotton belt, herringbone white weave with the black outer swath, the UV light will do fine on it, won't bleach it out. And when you look at my original belt, there is no stink or smell on it. But if you have one of those newfangled fake synthetic fiber bacteria trapping living in between the plastic nylon fibers and growing colonies, then yes, please wash your newfangled belt.
We've asked that to a lot of people. That's the most unique answer we've gotten as far as that's
very
concerned.
Animated too. Chris, listen, before we depart, before we finish this up, I have one question, and this it could be long, so keep it short. This is my personal question.
Okay.
What was it like training and sparring, particularly with guys like Rickson Gracie, or even, you know?
Well, I can say this: when you're a blue belt, when you're a white belt, grappling with a good purple belt feels basically the same as grappling with a black belt. You have no answers. They read your game. You get your ass kicked. And really, you don't start to feel how good someone is until you are up in ranks. But I do say that in his prime, Rickson Gracie was what I called the Enigma. His style, his mental part of the game, the athletic but type he had, and the jiu-jitsu skill were in perfect harmony. And he was, I mean, Rickson in his prime was, how do you compare guys in their primes, right? Mm-hmm. How do you compare who would win between all the historical greatest heavyweight boxers or whatever? I will say this, that as an aging black belt, I prefer Rickson's methodology, instruction, and evolution and style more than any other style. But also as an aging black belt, I will say the most humble that I've ever been as a 4-stripe, aging, still can apply game black belt was about 5 years ago, rolling with Rafa Mendes. Oh. When he first came, Pat Tenori from Ruka, him and I talked, and he was like, "Oh, dude, these guys are so good." And I remember thinking in my mind, yeah, they're good, but they won't beat me that bad. I didn't expect I would win, but I had never been so easily jiu-jitsu and athletically, and I'm not a bad athlete. Yeah, I was like 48 at the time, or 40, whatever. But I was so easily owned that it made me want to
quit. Listen, once again, before we finish this up, talk about combat base. I know that's one of the things that you and your wife are doing, from your place. And
combat base is really, I used to say all the time,
here we go.
The problem
Look
with
at this.
Combat base is it has no base. But here's combat base. Combat base is my garage. And that happened because the environment of Los Angeles is filled with schools and rent is expensive. And every time I had thought about maybe having a school, it always became easier to have it in my garage. So combat base is it is combat and
go back to your original spot.
We lose you, Chris.
Combatbase.com, and there's Zoom links and all that. And I don't know if I'm losing you guys with internet right now.
You're back.
You're back up right now.
But yes.
Combatbase.com.
So there's Combat Base. Let me know if you're in LA out there. Send me a message and you can come grapple us in the Combat Base garage.
Yeah, and if you're not watching this on YouTube,
you need to.
The way I can describe it is it's like all those basement punk shows you used to go to in the mid 80s when I was in high school. That's exactly what it looks like.
Chris.
And that's exactly what I want it to look like.
There you go. There you go.
All right, guys, I got to roll out.
Yeah, Chris, thank you for the conversation. Amazing stories. Thanks for your time. Thanks for sharing everything with you. And we'll make sure that we add the combat-based notes or the link to the notes under this episode so everybody can visit you, obviously, and cool. See what you're doing in your garage.
And I know I just blab and blab and blab. So
Listen,
No, that's
the
all
best
right.
stories ever.
Yeah, I've
Best
said this.
stories ever.
I've said this often. I mean it, but I mean it more today than usual. We got to do another one just to get more of these stories out. So thank you so much, and please join us again.
All right,
all
guys.
right, guys.
Take care.
All right, peace. Thank you.
Peace out.
Thank you for listening to RŌL Radio. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to leave us a review and help us make the show even more amazing. For future episodes, check out our website and follow us on all major podcast platforms. Take care.